Most people think the danger begins when the dog shows up. It doesn't. It begins the moment the officer decides to call for one. That's the part nobody tells you, and it's why people lose their rights before they even realize a game has started. I've spent years watching body camera footage, sitting through suppression hearings, reading transcripts where every word matters more than people think it does, and what I can tell you is this. The moment a K-9 unit is requested, the clock isn't just ticking for the officer, it's ticking for you. And in that narrow window, usually less than a minute in real-world terms, something subtle but decisive happens. People talk when they should be still. They agree when they should be neutral. They try to explain when they should be invoking something very simple. So I'm going to give you one phrase, just one. And if you remember nothing else from this, remember this. I do not consent to any searches. That's it. That's the anchor. That's the line that holds everything together. Now here's where this gets complicated, because people hear that phrase and assume it's some kind of magic shield. It isn't. It doesn't stop the dog from coming. It doesn't stop the officer from trying. It doesn't even guarantee you won't be searched. What it does is something far more important, something that only really becomes visible later, in a courtroom, when a judge is deciding whether what happened to you was lawful or not. Because in the world of search and seizure, consent is everything. And I mean everything. If you give it, even casually, even unintentionally, even with a shrug or a, yeah, I guess, you've just handed the government the legal foundation it needs to go through your car, your belongings, your life. And once that happens, trying to undo it is like trying to unring a bell. So let's walk into a real moment. You're pulled over. Maybe it's speeding, maybe it's something minor, maybe it's nothing at all, and they just say you crossed a line. The officer comes up, asks for license and registration, and everything feels routine at first. But then the questions stretch. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Whose car is this? You answer because you think you're supposed to. Most people do. And then there's a pause. It's subtle. It's not dramatic. But if you've watched enough footage, you recognize it instantly. The officer steps back, maybe puts a hand to their shoulder mic, maybe walks back to the cruiser. That's often the moment the K-9 request goes out. You won't hear it most of the time, but it's already happening. Now this is the part most people misunderstand. They think the dog needs a reason to come. In reality, the officer only needs to not prolong the stop beyond what's considered reasonable. That's where the law lives, in timing, in justification, in whether the stop was extended improperly. So what does the officer do while waiting? They keep you engaged. They ask more questions. They circle back. They create conversation that feels casual, but is actually strategic. Because every second you're talking is a second that can be justified as part of the stop. And this is the trap. Because while you're talking, they're building something. Maybe it's reasonable suspicion. Maybe it's just filling time. But either way, they're shaping the legal narrative that will be told later. And then comes the question. It almost always comes. Mind if I take a look in your car? It's asked casually. Friendly, even. Sometimes with a smile. Sometimes with a tone that suggests this is no big deal. Just routine. Just something to clear things up. And this is where people fail. Not because they don't know their rights, but because they hesitate. They laugh nervously. They say, I guess that's fine. Or worse, they say, I don't have anything to hide. Let me be honest with you. That sentence, I don't have anything to hide, has probably cost more people their cases than anything else I've ever seen. Because it's not about whether you have something to hide. It's about whether you have something to protect. And in that moment, the only thing protecting you is your ability to clearly, calmly say, I do not consent to any searches. Now here's where it turns, because when you say that, the dynamic changes. The officer knows you've drawn a line, not aggressively, not disrespectfully, just clearly, and now they have to decide what to do next. Sometimes they'll push. Why not? If you've got nothing to hide, what's the problem? That's psychological pressure. It's designed to make you feel unreasonable, to make you second-guess yourself, to make you think you're escalating something that doesn't need to be escalated. But what's really happening is this. They're trying to turn your clarity into doubt, and doubt is where consent slips out. So you repeat it. I do not consent to any searches. Same tone, same calm, no argument, no explanation. Because explanations create openings, and openings get filled. Now, let's talk about the dog. If the K-9 unit arrives while the stop is still legally ongoing, the officer can have the dog perform what's called a free air sniff around the exterior of your vehicle. That, by itself, is not considered a search under current law, which means your phrase doesn't stop the dog, but it does something critical. It preserves your position. Because if the dog alerts and they search your car, your lack of consent becomes part of the legal record. And if something about that process was flawed, timing, training, handling, that record becomes your defense. Without it, your case becomes much harder. Here's a realistic example. I had a client who was pulled over late at night. The officer claimed nervousness, inconsistent answers, the usual language you see in reports. A K-9 was called. While waiting, the officer asked for consent to search. My client said yes, just like that. No hesitation, no resistance, just yes. The dog arrived anyway, the search happened anyway, and evidence was found. When we went to court, I challenged the timing of the stop. I argued that it had been extended improperly to wait for the dog, but the prosecution didn't need to rely on the dog. They relied on consent, and consent erased everything I was trying to argue. That case could have gone very differently if one sentence had been used. I do not consent to any searches. Now let me tell you the hard truth, because nobody likes to say this part out loud. Asserting your rights can make things uncomfortable. It can make the officer more serious, less friendly. It can prolong the encounter. It can create tension that wasn't there before. You might be asked to step out of the car. You might be told to wait longer. You might feel like you've made things worse. And emotionally, it can feel like you've done something wrong. But legally, you've done something exactly right. And that distinction matters more than how the moment feels. Because the system doesn't run on feelings. It runs on records, on what was said, on what was done, on what can be proven. Now here's another layer people don't see. Officers are trained observers of behavior. They're watching your hands, your eyes, your tone, your breathing. They're reading you constantly. So when you assert your rights, how you do it matters. If you're aggressive, if you're confrontational, if your voice spikes, that can be interpreted as escalation. But if you're calm, steady voice, relaxed posture, direct eye contact without staring them down, you're communicating something very different. You're not resisting, you're asserting. There's a difference, and it's a difference that shows up on camera because body cam footage doesn't just capture what happened, it captures how it happened. Now think about your body in that moment. Your heart rate is up, your hands might be shaking, your thoughts are moving faster than you can organize them. That's adrenaline. And adrenaline makes people talk. It fills silence with words. It pushes you to explain, justify, smooth things over. But silence, controlled silence, is one of the most powerful things you have. You don't need to fill every gap. You don't need to respond to every question. You don't need to make the officer comfortable. You just need to be clear. I do not consent to any searches. Now, what if they ignore you? What if they search anyway? This happens. And when it does, you don't physically resist. You don't argue in that moment. You don't try to stop them. Because the roadside is not where you win that fight. The courtroom is. What you do instead is you stay consistent. You say it again if necessary, calmly. I do not consent to any searches. And then you let it play out. Because every second of that interaction is being recorded, and that recording becomes evidence. And evidence is where the truth gets examined. Now this is the part people struggle with because it feels passive. It feels like you're letting something happen to you. But you're not. You're setting up your defense. You're creating the conditions for a legal challenge that can actually succeed. Because without that clear, repeated lack of consent, your attorney has far less to work with. And I've seen it over and over again. Cases that hinge on a single sentence. Cases that fall apart because that sentence wasn't there. So when I tell you that you have about 60 seconds when a K-9 is called, what I really mean is this. You have a brief window where your words shape everything that comes after. Not the dog, not the search, your words. And most people waste that window trying to be agreeable, trying to be liked, trying to avoid tension. But the law doesn't reward that. It rewards clarity. So you give it clarity. I do not consent to any searches. You say it early. You say it clearly. You say it without attitude. And then you hold that line. Because this isn't about winning an argument on the side of the road. It's about protecting yourself in a system that is built on details most people never see. And if you take anything from this, it's this. Don't try to improvise in that moment. Don't rely on instinct. Rehearse it. Say it out loud until it feels normal, until it comes out without hesitation, until your voice doesn't shake when you say it. Because when that moment comes, and for a lot of people, it comes unexpectedly, you won't rise to the occasion. You'll fall back on what you've practiced. So make sure what you've practiced is the one thing that actually protects you. I do not consent to any searches.